In a recent video titled Morgan Wallen's Security Did This, released on April 12th of 2026, Ryan Upchurch presents a line of thought where music and sound are not just entertainment, but forms of frequency-based input that interact with human perception and internal state. Within that framing, he suggests that sound and frequency may influence how people feel, think, or process reality, and that these influences are not always fully understood or consciously recognized. He then connects this idea to broader discussions involving power structures and individuals such as Jeffrey Epstein and Jay-Z, implying that interest in areas like energy, frequency, or consciousness may exist within elite or high-level circles, and that these topics may intersect with deeper or less visible areas of research or influence. So the question is not whether these claims are true. The question is, what part of this idea are supported by measurable systems, and where does interpretation begin?
Information is no longer rare. It's constant. And in that constant flow, clarity becomes optional. My name is David Sharp, and this is Principles of Seven. We don't explain events. We trace structure. Because structure reveals something interpretation hides.
My name is Dave Sharp, and this is Principles of Seven. We don't chase conclusions, we map systems. And today, we're asking one precise question. How is human consciousness shaped by the signals it must continuously process? When I use the word signal, I'm not referring only to physics. I'm referring to structured input, sensory, informational, or environmental, that the nervous system must interpret in order to construct experience. Information is no longer stable, not because truth has disappeared, but because the rate of input has exceeded the brain's ability to fully integrate it. And in that gap between input and interpretation, a second layer of reality becomes visible. Not mystery, structure, not speculation, patterned influence across systems of perception. Consciousness does not exist outside human biology. It's expressed through it. The brain's not static. It's rhythmic, oscillatory, a dynamic system of electrical and chemical patterns that continuously shift across time. Neuroscience measures this in brainwave frequencies, neural oscillations, synchronized network activity. These rhythms are not abstract. They correspond to attention, sleep cycles, emotional regulation, perception stability, cognitive load. So when we talk about consciousness, we're not talking about something floating above biology. We're talking about a state, dependent system emerging from biological activity. And that state is constantly changing. Every moment of conscious experience enters through limited channels. Mechanical vibration or sound, where air pressure variations become neural signals through auditory systems. Photonic light input. Photons are converted into neural signals through retinal processing. Chemical and mechanical feedback, or the body state, where internal signals from hormones, respiration, and proprioception continuously form perception. External electromagnetic fields interact with human biology only under specific physical conditions, primarily affecting tissue heating and neural stimulation in controlled medical context. These are not philosophical claims. These are established biological pathways. Everything must pass through these systems before becoming experience. There is no bypass. Now we move into real systems that influence human state, not speculation, not theory, measured mechanisms. But this is important to understand about how systems are revealed. Public knowledge doesn't always move at the same speed as development. Technologies in communication, defense, and computation have historically existed in classified or restricted environments long before they were widely understood by the public. In many cases, what becomes publicly accepted as new has been refined in controlled settings for years and even decades. So what we're looking at here is not the full map. It is the visible layer of the map. And within that visible layer, we can identify the following. Techniques such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, it's known as TMS, can influence localized neural activity. They're used in depression treatment, stroke rehabilitation, neurological research. They do not insert thoughts. They modulate activity patterns in specific brain regions. Rhythmic stimulation, audio, visual, or combined, can influence attention, focus, relaxation states, sleep onset timing. This is based on neural synchronization tendencies, predictive timing in sensory systems. However, effects are temporary and state-dependent, not deterministic. They shift mood and arousal, not belief and identity, which can only be done from within. Modern human attention exists inside continuous informational flow, social media feeds, recommendation systems, algorithmic content selection, music. This is the most powerful influence layer currently known. Why? Because it shapes what is repeatedly seen, what is emotionally reinforced, what becomes normalized, what is ignored. This is not mind control, it is attention shaping through repetition and reinforcement. Human cognition is sensitive to sleep disruption, sensory overload, stress accumulation, decision fatigue. When these variables shift, cognition does not break, it reorganizes. This is where perception becomes less stable and more reactive. At this point, one principle becomes unavoidable. Conscious experience is state dependent, meaning sleep changes perception, stress alters interpretation, fatigue reduces cognitive clarity, overstimulation narrows attention. This does not mean consciousness is controlled. It means consciousness expresses differently depending on biological and environmental state. And that state is always being shaped by input. Now we move carefully into interpretation. Within known science, we already see that attention can be guided. Emotional states can be influenced. Behavioral patterns can be reinforced. Perception can be narrowed or expanded. So the real question is not whether consciousness is directly controlled. As of now, we don't have strict evidence for that, but it can be inferred. The real question is, how far can layered environmental and informational systems shape the condition in which consciousness operates? Because consciousness does not exist independently of state, it emerges through it. And state is continuously influenced by sensory input, environmental rhythm, informational repetition, biological circles that create these cycles. It's important to define boundaries clearly. There is no verified evidence of remote cognition systems or hidden global frequency networks that determine thought content, direct external programming of belief or identity. There's also no verifiable evidence that environmental radio frequency systems directly encode or control cognitive content. These ideas, they exist in a narrative, and right now, speculation, due to the fact that we do not have all of the answers as to what some of these private programs have actually built. So it's not in confirmed neuroscience or physics, as these realms are kept secret and private. But there is a second layer to consider. Historically, the public understanding of technology has not always aligned with its point of development. Advanced systems, whether in communications, computing, or defense, have often existed in classified environments long before becoming visible in public knowledge. In many cases, capabilities are understood only after they have already been operational for years. This does not imply that the existence of specific systems related to consciousness exist, but it does define a boundary condition. What is publicly verified is not always equivalent to what has been explored. So the distinction becomes more precise. On one side, what is measurable, testable, and openly validated? And on the other, what remains undisclosed, unverified, or outside of current public frameworks? Between those two is where interpretation begins to form, and where conclusions, accurate or not, start to take shape. What is supported is influence on attention, emotional regulation, sleep architecture, decision-making efficiency, cognitive load, and those variables indirectly shape how consciousness is experienced. The real question shifts to not towards hidden mechanisms, but towards observable structure. And on this channel, that's what we explore, is structure. How much of what we call self-directed thought is actually the production of stabilized or destabilized cognitive states? Because if state is continuously shaped, then experience is continuously shaped. And if experience is shaped, then consciousness is always operating within constraints. Maybe not externally controlled, but environmentally conditioned. Every system begins with a signal. Every signal enters a biological system. Every biological system produces a state. Every state produces experience. This is the layer being pointed to in the ideas presented by Ryan Upchurch. In my own words, not a conclusion, but as a direction of inquiry. Because when sound, music, and frequency are described as influencing perception, what is actually being referenced? At a measurable level, is the interaction between structured input and biological response. Not control, not hidden mechanisms, but influence operating within defined limits. And when those ideas are extended into broader discussions involving power structures and less visible systems, the question does not become whether those systems exist as described. The question becomes, Where does measurable influence end, and where does interpretation begin? Because the structure we can observe is already complex enough. Sound shapes states, light regulates rhythm, information directs attention, and attention stabilizes experience. But between input and identity, there's still a transition layer, a place where information becomes perception and perception becomes reality. This is the layer being explored, whether through music, discussion, or interpretation. We're not claiming answers. We're mapping the structure in which answers become possible. This is Principles of Seven, and structure always comes before understanding. God bless you. Good night. Be good to one another, and take care.